In this talk, I look at the Modi government's reform in historical perspective. India's economic policy reform goals since the 1980s and till approximately financial year 2004 have been the acceleration of economic growth. From FY05 to FY14, however, economic goals were downgraded and social goals took over. One of the results and consequences of this was a fiscal bubble followed by a growth slowdown. From June 2014 to May 2019, what may be called the PM Modi's first government, there were mixed goals, institutional and moral. So even though the initial objective was to get macroeconomic stability, growth recovery was followed by a slowdown. In Modi's second term, there was a realignment of goals which took place between June and August of 2019 towards re-accelerating economic growth, and therefore major policy reforms were initiated in September 2019. Let's put this in historical perspective by looking at the economic policy reforms and growth history from 1950 onwards. The period from 1950 to 79 was characterized by what I call bureaucratic socialism. During this period, growth slowed and poverty actually increased. From 1980 onwards was a period of market liberalization. The objective was for policy reforms to increase competition, increase productivity, and therefore accelerate growth for sustaining fast growth. This in turn was expected to increase revenues, both tax and non-tax, available for welfare programs. And there was also a focus on reforming the taxes and non-tax areas, and also introducing more efficiency and greater focus on government expenditures towards public goods such as roads, communicable diseases, macroeconomic framework, pollution, and externalities, infrastructure, and devise optimal subsidies to promote infrastructure. And also the third issue was information asymmetries, which required modern regulation. The result, faster GDP growth. The 1980s reform, which was selective decontrol and external trade reform, though very limited, had a tremendous positive effect on per capita GDP growth rate, almost tripling it from 1.3% per annum in the socialist period up to 1979 to 3.9% per annum after the reforms. The 1990s reforms were more extensive. They covered price, production, capacity, trade, decontrol of all these, investment decontrol, bringing in private domestic competition and foreign FDI, capital market decontrol, including related to Capital Controller of India, freeing of FIIs and ECB, external trade reforms, moving from QRs to tariffs, and then reduction of tariffs on manufacturing and minerals. Exchange rate reforms, moving from the control system to dual exchange rate and then towards uniform market-driven exchange rate. And then also the financial sector, including banks, equity markets, decontrol, and introduction of modern regulation. All these reforms together resulted in a further acceleration of per capita GDP growth from around 3.9% per year in the 80s to about 5.5% per annum. Remember this, we are talking of per capita GDP growth, which is what we measure we use internationally to measure comparative performance. Sustaining GDP growth. So after from roughly 99 to 2000, 99 2000 to 2003-4, during that 5-year period, the reforms including infrastructure, where the effort was to replace government monopolies by introducing private investment to get greater efficiency. This included new telecom policy, public goods focus such as on highways and rural roads, reform of the Electricity Act to increase competition and improve productivity in electricity production and distribution, and private ports, airports, etc. This was also the first bold step, but which didn't go far, in terms of CPSC privatization policy, the Central Public Sector Enterprises. And it was initiated in hotels, but then ran into severe political resistance and problems. But despite all these problems, the per capita GDP growth rate crept up slowly towards 6% per year. The next phase was from 2004-5 to 2014. The primary goal shifted to social objectives. And in 2009, I warned, this is my last, at the end of my tenure as Chief Economic Advisor, that reforms were needed to sustain growth. And if these reforms did not happen, the growth would slow down. In my going away media interviews and in a subsequent paper which appeared in the OECD series comparing 3 countries, I've made this clear. However, because of the goals, as the reforms for sustaining growth was not initiated, the growth rate declined. So as of 2014, when the new government replaced the UPA 2 government, the following competitiveness issues were still pending or on the table, so to say. These included structural imbalance, the high share of workers in agriculture and allied sector, the low agricultural productivity and rural underemployment, cost and quality of factors of production, whether it was labor, land, capital management, which reduced the competitiveness of Indian industry vis-a-vis other countries, the problems of education and quality and availability of skills, particularly in terms of the basic 3 R's as we call them: reading, writing, arithmetic, and this problem of credentialism, where giving out degrees without learning anything. Power electricity costs for industry specifically were too high compared to foreign countries. Similarly, there were problems with imported inputs in terms of high and very variable tariffs and remaining QRs on agricultural inputs, and very poor ease of doing business in terms of in international trade. And finally, of course, employment growth elasticities were very variable and became quite low at certain times because of the poor policy regime for labor intensive goods and services and startups. There were also problems connected with government inefficiency and waste. These included public sector monopolies which were unregulated and were inefficient and deadweight loss on the economy. Public enterprises, PSUs and public sector banks which were draining resources from the public exchequer and destroying instead of enhancing social welfare. Government inefficiency and corruption in taxation and tax bureaucracy, poor targeting of transfers and subsidies, and delivery problems in programs and projects. And finally, legal system was very inefficient in terms of police, courts, judiciary, and this has had a negative effect on the functioning of markets. So when the Modi first government came in, the focus was on institutional reforms. Among these, the positive reforms were the India Bankruptcy Code, which made a valiant effort to deal with management problems and bad debt, introducing competition into management. The setting up of an independent monetary policy committee with flexible inflation targeting. The goods and services tax, which was the first major positive constitutional reform in the economic aspects of the constitution for the first time in 70 years, and which combined 17 central and state government indirect taxes. And then there were reforms in natural resources, oil, coal, mineral spectrum, to make the sale of these through auctions to private bidders, which would make them more efficient, competitive, and revenue generating. Then there were further institutional reforms in terms of direct benefit transfers in Aadhaar, Jan Dhan accounts, DC-2 to farmers, Digital India, e-governance, GEM, UPI, fin and health tax, seeding of personal income tax with UID, and BharatNet extension to the whole country, though this has been very slow and is still in process. But in principle, it is a transformative reform, though it needs to be speeded up. And then there were much greater and more effective focus on tech startups, which could generate modern and quality jobs. So a kind of a shifting of focus from traditional MSMEs to more emphasis on tech startups. And then, of course, the environmental shift, including International Solar Alliance, BS6 and EVs. However, the policy during this term, the policy perspective shifted from growth revival to more on moral and social goals with focus on anti-corruption laws, demonetization, etc. The second, so this, whatever the social or moral achievements of this, it had collateral negative effects on the economy. The second was that even the institutional reforms which we have listed earlier, which would generally have a positive, which were expected to have a positive effect, have a J-curve effects on growth, which we have analyzed in a research paper. And therefore, the IBC, which was very good in the long term for resolving management and capital problems, debt problems, had short-term costs. Similarly, the GST, which was expected to transform the indirect tax system, was initially very complex because the state's acquiescence had to be obtained to get and constitutional compromises made. And similarly, the MPC, with all over the world, is expected to reduce inflation, had teething problems in the form of forecasting errors and very high real rates, which accelerated or made this J portion of the curve very strongly negative. There was, of course, the legacy problems of twin debt and companies and banks which were inherited but were not adequately solved, and given all these, including the IBC and the MPC forecasting errors and high real rates, this led up to the NBFC crisis, which then triggered other negative effects. And of course, what was worse, the NBFC crisis was followed by higher taxes and budgets in the budget, which reduced the government's reform credibility, and market confidence suffered, resulting in a sharp decline in GDP growth and investment in FY20. Big bang reforms in 2020. The government, during sometime in between when it came after the election, between June and August, it realized that a reassignment was needed, and this led to a big reform of the corporate tax rate, corporate tax with a rate reduction to 25% and a special 15% rate to attract supply chains in manufacturing from the rest of the world. Other reforms since then have included reduction in government monopoly and introduction of private competition in coal, oil, defense, space and atomic energy sectors. There was a strategic industry policy framework was approved by the cabinet, and in the process of getting detailed work out, the most important fact about or the advantage of this framework is that it provides a framework for privatization of CPSUs and PSBs rather than having ad hoc targets of privatization. And one evidence of this framework already in place is the privatization of Shipping Corporation of India, which would not have been expected, let's say, a year ago, before this framework was approved. The fourth element of this Big Bang reform was the educational policy, which has been in the works for a long time, and educational policy, including medical education policy, which allows private and foreign entry into the education sector, besides several other positive steps. Agricultural, the Essential Commodity Act and the three agricultural laws was a big step forward in introducing competition into the marketing and market development for agricultural products and promoting innovation and productivity in agriculture. Then the labor codes, 29 labor codes were combined into 4. One of these, of course, had been passed earlier, but the three more important ones were also passed in. And then another reform was the Electricity Amendment Bill, which sought to reform the part which still had not been reformed, which was the distribution, despite the Electricity Act of 2003, and trying to introduce marginal cost pricing into the distribution, which is largely under the control of states. And then the mining policy, which has been approved by cabinet more recently. On top of this, now we turn our attention to the potential reforms, which will promote. Recall that I laid out an unfinished agenda which existed in 2014, and the various problems which the industry was facing in terms of competitiveness with other countries. The government has taken many steps which we gave in the previous slide, and in this slide we turn to potential reforms which still need to be done to promote greater competitiveness of Indian industry vis-a-vis other countries, including ASEAN and China. So the first one is GST simplification, rates exemption and cesses. There is still huge scope for simplification, which can be done by the the GST Council, which consisting of center and states, but the central government can take the initiative using the policy, the research paper we have done at eGrow Foundation, giving a roadmap of how to do this. The direct tax code still needs simplification, rationalization, and bringing up to global best practice. Both these reforms are very important for MSMEs and startup to reduce their financial cost and their time cost, which entrepreneurs who are often single people who manage the whole affair, so that they can focus more on competition, productivity, etc., instead of wasting their time in these bureaucratic problems. So direct talk, and then also over time, the surcharges and cess on income tax, personal income tax, should be phased out. The second set of major reforms is on poverty. We've had poverty reforms in the poverty alleviation, poverty elimination system for years, and the pandemic has revealed more problems. So all these can be addressed by a three-pronged reform of the system, which includes development of a welfare stack, a VSIC, which is a virtual welfare integrated smart card, and introducing direct cash transfers or DBT mobile by pooling by pooling the central government's schemes, etc. Because the central government cannot direct states to do all the pooling, but it can do the pooling itself. But the welfare stack would include all central and state governments, and the welfare integrated smart card is an idea which can be used immediately for the central government, but also can be available for future use by states. Skills. We need to increase the learning by doing in manufacturing by reforming the Apprenticeship Act and providing an e-skilling platform. Exports promotion and requires simplifying and moving import tariffs towards uniformity. For example, textiles have 15 different specific rates. These should be replaced by a single uniform tariff rate. Similarly, agricultural QR system is very complex and discourages development of new export markets. This should be replaced by a tariff ban. EODB regulations, the regulations for ease of doing the business need to be decriminalized, reduced, digitized, and moved over to post-file audit. Now, the central government only covers only 40% of these, and the state governments cover 60%. So the central government could have a model act which then applies in SEZs and UTs which are under its control. Financial sector reform and resiliency has long been pending and still requires reform. And then, of course, states have their own EODB, which is not directly under the central government, but I'm noting for the record. So let us briefly look at the post-pandemic opportunities. These include deglobalization trends in trade, FDI, and work visas. These trends have been there before but will be accelerated. And the new one is in terms of work from home and remote working from home also means that the US and EU markets, they can get people to remote work from India. So this is a great opportunity. High-tech decoupling, value chains, R&D, SI, this skill-intensive is going to, because of the experience of pandemic and what China did during the pandemic, there is a greater incentive for value chains to move out, and India must do whatever it can to attract these value chains. Supply chain diversification. Again, The Trump administration, of course, has been pushing for high-tech decoupling and partial economic decoupling through tariffs, etc. But this supply chain diversification will continue, though perhaps not as the way that the Trump administration was trying to push it, but it will continue. And we need to, and Japan has already announced, and Australia have announced resiliency initiatives, supply chain resiliency initiatives, and we need to promote these to US, UK, and also to do whatever we can to take advantage of them. In particular, this requires a dualistic trade policy, which is different for China and for the rest of the world ex-China. So as far as China is concerned, I think India and the rest of the world should break China's manufacturing export monopoly, which has been developed through asymmetric trade policies. This requires temporary, I would say 3 to 5 years, higher tariffs, but well targeted and phased. A scattershot approach which just raises a whole lot of tariffs, as has happened in the past, is not going to be effective. And of course, the product-linked incentive scheme, which has been introduced by government, is a very important and useful thing for raising the minimum efficient scale of production and making Indian industry more competitive with China. And this must be coordinated with the earlier point I made about temporary higher tariffs targeted things. So it must be coordinated. The two things need to be carefully coordinated so the minimum efficient scale is built before we give tariff protection to that industry which has built the minimum efficient scale, and not an industry which is inefficient and will not become competitive. But on the rest of the world, we should move towards a uniform 8% tariff, somewhere between, let's say, 5 and 10%. I'm taking 7.5 or 8% as illustrative tariff on all manufacturing, mining, and agricultural inputs into production. See, we can have a somewhat different tax regime. We can maintain a little longer for protection of final goods. For example, cereals which are consumed, edible oils, milk products. But for all inputs like cotton, which goes into production, it is much better, more efficient if we have a single uniform tariff, if we move towards that as soon as possible. These can be supplemented, the supply chains will come faster to India if we have free trade agreement with EU and USA. And this is very important because most MNCs are from US, EU, are based in this thing, and these are the main conduits of supply chains. The supply chain resiliency initiative I have already mentioned. Then there are also more post-pandemic opportunities in digitization. So we were lagging a little behind the advanced countries in digitization of the economy and design and adoption by household. So now there's an opportunity for faster catch up. And in particular in social sectors, the demand for e-medicine, e-education has gone up because of the pandemic. And because we are starting on a fresh slate, there's a huge opportunity for building this sector as a frontline sector compared to the rest of the world. Public goods infrastructure, there has been a lot of focus in the last 5 years. So a base has been created in terms of e-governance, connectivity, the Aadhaar base, digital platforms like UPI, FinStack, HealthStack, etc. This provides an opportunity for building on. And then given that we haven't created many of the regulations, we can straight away go to best practice of futuristic regulation which will promote e-commerce, social media, startups, etc. Similarly, in public health, we should build on our strengths. These include pharma and drugs, so we could be even strengthen our position further in vaccine production for the world, not only production but also in R&D and development of new vaccine. Active pharma ingredients, API, import substitution is an opportunity to promote this. Similarly, we already have a Swachh Bharat program. We need to broaden it to building modern sewage and waste collection systems, including treatment and recycling, especially of sewage, which has been shown to be a transmitter of viruses and even COVID-19 virus. And this will have the additional benefit of reducing environmental enteropathy, which has been shown, research has shown to be implicated in stunting and wasting. Conclusion. So in FY20, growth had gone down to 4.2%, with last Q4 growth had down to 3.51%. In FY21, that is 19, 20, 21, in May of 20, we had forecast that growth, because of pandemic and pandemic uncertainty, lockdowns, growth would be centered on -5%, but with a wide plus minus range of 2.5%. As more data came in June, July, we said there was a downward bias in this forecast, i.e. the growth was likely to be between -7.5% to -5%. This has largely, this is where we still think growth will be. Then coming to primary goal of Modi into 2020 has shifted, as we said earlier, to accelerating GDP growth by improving competitiveness. And as part of this, major reforms, domestic reforms in 22 have been initiated in 2022. The remaining reforms which we have outlined should be completed in 2021 to minimize the risk from slower world growth, which is anticipated by all the multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, and also to maximize geo-economic opportunities, some of which we have spelled out in this talk. If this is done, we expect FY22 growth to be double-digit growth with a risk or uncertainty band of ±1%. And further, if the reforms we have proposed are completed in FY21, then I'm confident that average growth rate over the next decade will be in the 7.5% ±0.5% range, i.e. We can grow despite many pessimistic forecasts that growth cannot go over 6.5%. I think given big bang reforms of the kind we have discussed in this talk, a growth range of over 7% is feasible. Thank you.